Hey everyone, today I want to talk about one of the most common, if not the most common chess tactic that we can have in the opening, and this is a queen fork, but as we'll see, a very particular queen fork, which is the queen giving a check and attacking an enemy piece on our side of the board. So without further ado, let's start with one position where we can get this queen fork. After e4 and c5, we get the Sicilian defense. We're gonna see this idea in a lot of lines in the Sicilian defense. And after knight to f3 and d6, this is a very common way to go. Black has many options. Here the move c3 is an interesting idea, preparing the move d4. Knight to f6 is a very natural developing move, also attacking the pawn e4. And here the most common move is to develop the bishop to e2, seemingly blundering the pawn on e4, which black should definitely not go for, because after the move knight takes e4, we see that the move c3 also allows the queen to develop. After queen to a4, we get this fork with a check and an enemy piece on our side of the board. So in this case, black places a piece on the 4th rank, and as we see, when black gets this fork, it's gonna be a white piece on the 5th rank. So in this case, white will simply pick up the knight after black moves. Now let's see this tactic in the queen's pawn opening after d4, knight to f6, c4, c5 has been played a lot, and after d5 and e6, we're normally gonna get the Benoni defense. So here an interesting way for white is to go knight to f3, and after black takes and we take back, the move d6 is very common here. The idea is to develop the bishop to g7 after g6 and bishop to g7, and here the most common and natural move for white is to develop the knight to c3, then prepare the move e4. But in this particular position we can play the move e4, even though we might transpose to lines where we go for knight to c3. Here we invite our opponent to fall for this trap. Here black should continue developing and definitely not take the pawn e4, because after queen to a4 we get again this fork with a check and a piece on our side of the board. Now let me show you this line on a very crazy opening, the move d4, which is the Grob opening. Not a good opening, maybe you can play it for fun occasionally. And after d5, the move bishop to g2 seems to blunder the pawn on g4. And after the move c4, black should be doing fine, but black should be a bit careful. So here black normally goes for the move c6, defending the pawn on d5. The point is that after black takes on c4 and bishop takes, white is gonna get the rook on a8, although even after knight to d7, bishop takes and queen takes, black gets very good compensation for the exchange. But the move c6 is a bit more solid, and here after white takes and black takes, the move queen to b3 will fork these two pawns, and in this position black should be a bit careful. For example, black should continue developing by going knight to f6. The point is that after queen takes and knight b to d7, black gets a lot of development and black is doing quite fine. But black might try a similar idea to go e6. If white takes on b7, black will simply continue developing and have a great position. But after the move e6, we see that we get queen to a4, we get a check, and we attack this bishop on the 4th rank. So the point is that after the move e6, the bishop cannot retreat to d7, so white is going to win the bishop on g4. This move e6 has been played a lot, so black very often falls for this tactic. Now let's go back to the Sicilian defense after the moves e4, c5, knight to f3, knight to c6. The move bishop to b5 has been played, and black has tried, although not very often, the move knight to d4, attacking the bishop, and after knight takes and pawn takes, let me ask you, what do you think about the move d3 by white? So let's see other opening lines, in this case where white can fall for this queen fork. After e4, c6, knight to f3, we get a Sicilian defense. The move e6 is also very common. And after d4, pawn takes and knight takes, knight to f6 is a very common move. Attacking the pawn e4, white should normally defend it with a move like knight to c3, but the move e5 might be very tempting. But this is just a blunder that white very often falls for. The idea is that if the knight moves, for example, to d5, we can continue attacking it. But now we see the pattern that we have a piece on the opponent's side of the board, and the queen can give a check. So here we get the move queen to a5, we give a check, and black will collect the pawn on e5. Now let's go back to the Sicilian defense after e4, c5. Another idea that white has tried is the move d4. And after pawn takes, white could take with the queen, but this will help black develop. So knight to f3 has been tried, and here black could definitely continue developing. For example, knight to c6, giving the pawn back, The main idea is that after knight to f6, now we can play the move e5, because even though the pawn is on the opponent's side of the board, it is defended, so the move queen to a5 will not pick up the pawn, and the pawn attacks the knight on f6. But here black can also try an interesting move, which is the move e5. Seemingly blundering a pawn, but taking the pawn on e5 is actually quite bad, because after the move queen to a5, now we get the fork, where black is going to pick up the knight on e5. So after the move e5, white should definitely not collect the pawn. White can actually go c3, and if black takes and knight takes, white gets very good development and compensation for the sacrificed pawn. And before I continue with more opening lines where we get this tactic, if you want to seriously improve at chess besides knowing important chess tactics, I have a free course that will provide you with a training plan for that, so feel free to check the link in the description. So now after the move e4 and e5, knight to f3, knight to c6, bishop to b5, we can get a line where this queen fork appears. After the move knight to f6, attacking the pawn e4, the move d3 is one of the most common replies in the position, and here black can try the move knight to e7. Objectively not the best move, but quite interesting to trick white. The knight on e7 doesn't seem to make a lot of sense, it is blocking the bishop on a fade, black is moving a piece twice, and black seems to blunder a pawn. Before we analyze that line, here white should simply continue developing, either castle, go knight to c3, white has a very good position there, but after knight takes on e5, now we see two pieces on the 5th rank, so this should already give us an alert. Here black can go c6, opening the way for the queen, and black is going to win material. If the bishop moves either to c4 or a4, black can simply go for this tactic and win the knight on e5. Although here white can try one interesting trick, which is the move knight to c4, planning to go knight to d6, checkmate, but black can simply stop that with a move like d6. The bishop now has to move, and after bishop to a4, here we don't have the fork with queen to a5 because the knight is defending that square, but we can simply play b5 and we get another fork, and black is going to win a piece. And the last common position where we can get this queen fork, after the move d4, knight to f6, white has many options. Bishop to g5, it's not the most common move, but it has been played quite a lot. And here black could continue with a move like e6 or d5, but the move c6 is actually quite interesting. It avoids the main lines, and it also sets up a very nice trap. Here white should continue developing, but the move e3 might look very natural because in this position, white very often wants to play the pawns on the dot squares, and white is ready to take on f6 in some lines. But here after the move e3, we see that now the bishop doesn't have a way back to the queen side, and after the move queen to a5, we get this queen fork that we have been talking about. So hope that you can use this chess tactic to win a lot of games very quickly and to prevent these very common blunders. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.